All right, hey guys, just going to go through this video to try and give you a little bit of a summary of the Highwaymen based on sort of what we've done in class and just hopefully a few other things just as a revision. So obviously we've got the title. In class, Natasha gave us a little bit of a different explanation of a text by Rudyard Kipling and another text. I don't quite have that in my notes, so hopefully you remember that from class. But essentially the idea of hollow is that there's no substance, it's empty, vapid, that sort of brokenness. And the idea of men is that collective sort of sense of humanity, that the decay of sort of modern society has impacted on humanity so badly, that there's nothing within us. Okay, so no purpose, no meaning. Now, there's a lot of intertextuality in the idea of the hollow men that I'll just go through the first two, and then obviously there's a lot more in the two epigraphs. So the first one with the hollow men we'll start with is Heart of Darkness, okay, which is going to be referred to in the first epigraph of Mr. Kurtz, and it's this quote: "It echoed loudly within him because he was hollow at the core," which is a comment on Kurtz. So when we then get to Mr. Kurtz, we understand that he is a hollow man as well, okay, a man who is empty, vapid, lost touch in terms of his moral integrity, and I'll explain that a little bit more in the epigraph. The other one is about Julius Caesar, and it comes from Act 4, Scene 2. And when we look at that particular excerpt, the quote is, "but hollow men," and that's Brutus who says that about some other people within the play. But Brutus, in fact, becomes the person who is the most hollow because he is the one who, despite not having a big problem with Julius Caesar, murders him so he can sort of rise to become emperor of Rome. So there's a real insincerity in that sort of idea of Brutus calling other people hollow, when in fact, he's morally corrupt as much as anyone else that he's commenting on. So we've got this real sense of it's not just hollow and empty, but almost like morally, inept, that they've done things that are against, sort of a positive sort of society. Then we've got the first epigraph, Mr. Kurtz He Dead, which is a reference to The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Okay, so really quick summary of what that particular novel is about is that Kurtz was basically an ivory trader, and he was deeply in the Congo jungle, and he was securing ivory from the Africans, and he was sort of taking it to sell it, and it's a very valuable commodity in that time. He was the most successful of all, and the reason why he was the most successful of all is that he totally lost his morality, and he becomes like a quasi-king for the natives in that particular novel. Just before he died, his most famous words in the novel were "the horror, okay, and he says that just before he passes away. So he represents that journey of life, but he loses his way, okay, and that's essentially, I believe, why T.S. Eliot has used him, because he represents the hollow men of this particular generation in 1925 that Eliot is writing. Contextually, we also have the fact that at this stage, compared to the other texts, after World War I, Treaty of Versailles, that the world is in a state of decline. Okay, World War I has been negative. And we've also had the Treaty of Versailles, which essentially creates the platform for World War II to occur. So whilst Eliot wouldn't have known that in 1925, it's clear that the world is not in a great place in this particular time, and this just precedes the Great Depression in 1929 as well. So things aren't going to get better in terms of what he's seeing in the world. The second epigraph is A Penny for the Old Guy, which has sort of two reference points. So one being Charon, the ancient Greek mythology here is about a penny that you had to pay to cross the river Styx into the realm of death. Okay, so this is a bit of the mythology about how you go from sort of dying to either heaven or hell. Okay, and this being a part of that sort of journey. So again, we've got this sort of sense of journey. That's in both Heart of Darkness and this journey that's in this ancient Greek myth. So journey becomes a little bit of a motif that we are on this journey, probably pretty much from birth till we die, to the afterlife, okay? And we're sort of judged on the manner in which we've held ourselves during life, and whether we get to go to heaven or hell. The other one with the penny for the old guy is that it's Guy Fawkes Day. The guy in it refers to the actual man Guy Fawkes, who tried to blow up the Parliament in England, and the reason why he was trying to do that is that he was protesting against not being able to practice his Catholic faith openly. Now, he didn't actually ever get to blow up the Parliament. He got caught before that, and as a way of sort of denigrating his memory on that particular day, on the 5th of November, on Guy Fawkes Day, the young kids asked for a penny from people to be able to buy fireworks or to be able to buy fire or straw, because they burn effigies. Okay, now an effigy is like a straw sort of person in the likeness of that person, and they burn it to sort of, like I said, denigrate his memory. So we see all these people who potentially are part of this sort of morally corrupt society, and part of that denigration of the society that is in existence, and are reflective of the hollow men themselves. So when we get to part one, we get the collective sort of voice of we, that one voice representing sort of the collective experience of the hollow men. We've got the hollow men like Kurtz, okay, we've got that link from that quote, and the stuffed men like the effigy, like Guy Fawkes. So we've got that sort of idea of him being like a straw figure. Straight after that, we've got the idea of leaning together, which is an oxymoron. Generally, if you were leaning together, you'd be falling over. But it's like they're supporting one another in this terrible moment of their lives. Okay, and the illusion of scarecrows in the stuffed men, and like the Guy Fawkes sort of effigy, gives the idea, and we'll talk about this a bit more, is that scarecrows are pretending to be something that they are not. Okay, so one of the things they're pretending to be is a human to scare off the crows, but they're actually just empty. Okay, which is essentially reflective of what these men in this generation are. Then we've got this headpiece filled with straw, which again alludes to the effigy and the scarecrows. But the headpiece is like a leadership sort of symbol, but the leadership is filled with nothing. Okay, so straw is sort of emptiness, it's dry, it's lifeless. Okay, so even the leadership of the time has no sort of relevance. And then the word alas by itself, it's a very resigned tone. And what more could we expect from stuffed or hollow men? Okay, we probably shouldn't expect so much more from them because they don't have a lot to say. There's not a lot within them. Okay, remembering that they're empty. Then we've got this our dried voices, and we've got, as we go down the other green sort of highlights, we've got the dry 2 more times. So the whole scene here in this stanza is very dry, vapid, void of moisture, which essentially is void of life. Okay, water is the lifeline. At this point, our dried voices, when we whisper together, it's not like all the time. They're not always able to speak, but when they do, it's again together. But they whisper. So it's not like there's any certainty or any definity in what they're saying. It's like they're unified in their misery, okay? And the repetition of the together gives us that idea. Here also, they whisper together, they're quiet and meaningless, okay? So we can't even hear them, but what we can hear is not purposeful or not, sort of relevant, okay? When we sort of also get this idea of like not wanting people to hear, it sort of harks back to Guido in Dante's Inferno, in the excerpt from Prufrock. Okay, so we've got this idea again of not wanting to say the truth if we think that people might hear us. Okay, so they're sort of whispering and they're quiet, but they're meaningless. So they don't really want to share the truth of what they've done and the corruption that has sort of probably dominated their lives, particularly at this point, just before they're going to be judged. Then we've got the wind in the dry grass. We've got the rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Okay, so like I said, all of those expressions are void of life, void of meaning, void of purpose. We've got the sibilants here in the meaningless, the grass, the glass, and even in the other S, like the whisper and the rats, to sort of give us this musical element. But again, it's a musical element used by Eliot in an inverse manner because it isn't musical or positive. But he does that to, again, in that modernist approach, use a technique and then confuse us with a different meaning. So then we go on to the next stanza, and we've got this idea of shape without form, shade without color. So when we've got shape without form, it doesn't really make sense, but paradoxically, they're there, but they're without purpose or meaning, or without the right and appropriate equivalent. So obviously if you had shape, you would have form, and obviously if you had shade, you'd have some color. Even if it was dark, it'd be a color. But the absence of those things paradoxically mean that they're sort of there, but they're not there. Okay, and we've talked a little bit about that unreachable sort of thing, like it's there, but you can't quite get it. And these people now in the afterlife, or just before Judgment Day, are basically sort of there, but they're not there. They're there, but without meaning, without purpose, and that's essentially the paradox. Then we've got this oxymoron in paralyzed force. So they've got force, but it's paralyzed. So again, it's no action. They've got gesture, but they've got no motion. So again, an impossibility. They've got a thought, but they can't get it to do anything. All right. So can you see this is going to come back later in the poem? It's a real sense of being trapped and not being able to sort of move forward. Again, a little bit like the crab, that we have in Prufrock. And a lot of the illusions is that modern man is not moving forward. Okay, either moving sideways or, as we're going to see in this poem, descending and moving backwards. Then we've got that sort of as a 2 sort of line stanza, and we go on then to the 3rd stanza of this part, and we've got those who have crossed. So now we've got those, not necessarily the hollow man. It seems like someone else. And crossed, we go back to Sharon and our idea of the river Styx and having to sort of pay your penny to sort of be able to get across. But now we've got with direct eyes, and there's a little bit of a confidence and a surety about these particular sort of people, to death's other kingdom. Now at this stage we haven't had the moment of judgment, so death's other kingdom is dependent on that judgment. So obviously you're a good person, you go to heaven. If you're a bad person, you go to hell. And obviously a lot of this then refers back to the ideas in the Divine Comedy. And the inferno of hell, okay, potentially being where you go, or paradiso, where you go to heaven. Essentially, they're probably in purgatorio, okay, in purgatory at this stage, okay. So there's a lot of references now in the next section to like Beatrice, which is a part of Dante's Inferno, and a part of like Dante's sort of trip. Actually, more in paradiso when he meets his girlfriend who's passed, and we'll see those come into the poem as we move on. Remember us, okay, so it again gets back to the hollow men. Remember us, like the hollow men, if at all not as lost violent souls, okay. So they don't want to be known as violent souls, but they only want to be known as what they are, which is the hollow men, the stuffed men. They prefer to be known as that than violent. Now this may make an allusion to the actions in war, because obviously some men had murdered other soldiers without knowing too much about that murder necessarily, and seeing them in the eyes, but obviously not a positive sort of image of themselves as a person. So obviously when they're murdering in war, they're creating a situation where they would feel violent and feel negative about themselves, but they don't want to be seen as that. They'd rather be seen as empty and hollow rather than to be seen as violent. Okay, so it's a slight thing, but it's a preference for them in terms of the way that we see them. So as we move down to part 2, we get to the eyes I dare not meet in dreams, and we've got the technique of synecdoche again, where we see a part of this person, and the eyes have a fairly large sort of symbolic or sort of one of those tropes where eyes are the window to the soul. So when we're looking at eyes and looking into people and through people, that's when we see who they really are. So here, these eyes do not meet, I dare not meet in dreams. So they don't want to be looked at. They don't want to be seen for who they are, because they know what people will find, and essentially that is the hollow men and the straw stuffed men. They don't want people to know that that's what they are, that they're empty and that they're without purpose. Then they don't want that in Death's dream kingdom, which is more specific now to heaven. because obviously they believe that those people in heaven would be able to see them for who they really are. Okay, and obviously they don't think that's very positive. Then when we go on to, these do not appear there. These do not appear, all right? So they're saying it's not there, but this is what they would hope for. They're the eyes of sunlight, okay, which is a pretty positive image. Now we've got this sort of idea that Dante, when he first meets Beatrice in Paradiso, won't look her in the eyes because he's shamed by who he is, and he doesn't believe he's good enough for her. But once he is purified in the River Leith, Dante can then look into Beatrice's eyes, and essentially that's why Beatrice set up the whole sort of trip that Dante takes, okay, a little bit like, again, we've got this idea of journey, because what she wanted for him was to see how bad hell was so that he would definitely come to her in heaven, okay, in the afterlife, and that they would be able to share their life again. So she does that for him. She wants him to go through like this journey to be able to learn, and when he can look her in the eyes, then it's more than likely that he will actually reach heaven in the afterlife, because he's seen her, he's gotten rid of his shame through this sort of like this cleansing by this purifying of the water. So the eyes are sunlight, that when he actually looks at Beatrice, or when he's able to, he feels really good. And they're looking on a broken column, which is a traditional graveyard memorial for a premature death, which could be because Beatrice died prematurely, but it also could represent, the soldiers who died, prematurely as well, okay, in the context of the war. The tree is swinging, the voices are in the wind singing. We've got these beautiful musical elements, and we've seen this in the previous poems where like the sirens were able to like sing, the mermaids, but not for Prufrock. We also have like those musical elements in all of the other poems. Preludes being a musical element prior to the main element. We've got the Rhapsody, and we've got the love song. So music is an element that he's constantly trying to bring into his analysis. Okay, so it sort of makes it easy for us to see that singing and music should be positive. But in the previous three poems, essentially what he's done is he's again inverted that and made it a negative. So here again he does the same thing. When you think you're close to this sort of beautiful image, unfortunately for the hollow men, they're more distant and they're more solemn. So they see it as a beautiful thing, but it's elusive, and it's more solemn and more distant than a fading star. Okay, so that, again, the star. Sorry, just come here. So the star is a beautiful image as well, but this star is fading. So we've got that dissension, that beauty eroding, and if the star was representative of God, but it is fading, then we've got that sort of existential question of, well, where is God in the decaying world? That's going to become a bigger question as we go through, and Eliot starts to look at some religious sort of motifs. Then we've got this idea of let me be no nearer in death's dream kingdom. So we've got again heaven being referred to, but he doesn't want to be near that, the hollow men. Let me also wear such deliberate disguises. So he's saying, what if I could disguise myself? Maybe I could trick my way into heaven. Maybe someone would sort of look at me and go, oh yeah, like that person actually isn't as bad as we thought they were. But it would be a mistruth. So when we think back to Prufrock and the faces, that we prepare to meet other faces, or we think about the women coming and going, talking of Michelangelo, we've got this idea again of the sculpted self. Okay, not the real self. It's like that duality. I really am a bad person, but I would like people to think I'm a lot better than that. So we've got this, real sort of, intentional way of maybe trying to hoodwink our way into heaven, even though we've led this sort of morally corrupt life. So then we've got the rat's coat and crow skin, which are essentially the origins of scarecrows, where we try to dress things up like they weren't. But again, we've got this, even the scarecrows themselves, the straw, it's pretending to be something you're not, for a different purpose. The cross staves are an instrument that measures the angle of elevation of heavenly bodies, and essentially we get the sense here that they wish those things were there so that they could potentially ascend to heaven. reality says, when they're in a field behaving as the wind behaves, like trying to be something they're not, trying to be the scarecrow, like, sort of moving with the wind and trying to, sort of trick the crows, they're no nearer. Okay, so it doesn't matter that they can convince themselves that maybe they could, sort of trick people that they're better. The truth of the matter is that when you actually see it, you don't actually feel like you any chance of being any nearer to Death's Dream Kingdom, that you're just not near it. You're not ever going to get there. Then we get back to this, not that final meeting in the Twilight Kingdom. All right, so the final meeting would be that one where we get, it's Judgment Day, and the Twilight Kingdom would be, again, that dying, decaying world. All right, so the kingdom would be the kingdom of God, but the reason it's in Twilight is we're really close to it. And we're going to see that kingdom sort of, is not for the hollow men, because they didn't believe, they didn't lead that, sort of morally integrity, they didn't lead their life with moral integrity, so that they could access, this sort of heaven, or this, this afterlife. The final meeting also alludes a little bit to Heart of Darkness, where Marlowe's, obviously, the final meeting for Kurtz was the horror of the horror, as he passed away. But when Marlowe, tells Kurtz's fiancée of the final words, he tells her that the final words that he said were her name, okay, which is really nice, but again, falsifying the truth. So again, we go back to Guido, and he said, I would only tell you the truth if I didn't think you could tell anyone else. And in essence, we're not telling this truth. Okay, we're sort of, we're not prepared to say what we really want to say, because of how we'll be judged. And the hollow men know they'll be judged poorly. Okay, for this. Then we move into section 3, and then we're in this. This is the Deadland. It's almost like we're progressing on this journey to this new realm. It's almost like the circles of hell, and like Dante is sort of moving, through this afterlife. But it's not getting better. All right. At the moment now, it's a dead life, void of dead land. Sorry, void of life. This is cactus land. All right. So the only thing that can survive here is something that requires no water, very little care. Something that can survive despite the poor sort of conditions. And here the stone images are raised, all right, sort of like we're now worshipping sort of false gods or pagan gods. And here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. So it's like we're trying to catch this star, catch maybe this religious fervor, but our hand is dead, so we can't catch it, because even if we did catch it, it would go into a lifeless figure. But the reason we're probably not going to catch it is because it's twinkling. It's very slight now, and it's fading again. So before it was just a fading star, now it's a twinkle of a fading star. So it's only the little bit of a fading star. So we've got that real erosion of beauty as we're moving through this poem, and it's, like I said, it's not getting better. Okay, everything is denigrating and descending, just like Dante did as he sort of delved into the circles of hell in the Divine Comedy. So then we go, is it like this in Death's Other Kingdom? So again, we've got, Death's Other Kingdom, this sort of uncertainty. It's not like heaven now, it could be heaven or hell. And they're walking alone, okay? So we've had this real collective sense, but I guess on your Judgment Day, the collective sense is going to be no longer. Your Judgment Day is going to be yours and yours alone, and it's not going to matter necessarily how the collective sort of experience things. It's going to be on you. Okay, so now they're a little bit more sort of isolated, and it goes back to a quote from Heart of Darkness towards the end of part 1. We live as we dream alone. Okay, so you can't sort of blame and point the finger at other people. Essentially, I think Eliot would like to point the finger for all of the hollow men at the modern society, okay, and that was the destruction of the modern man. So it's not like their fault, it's like society is to blame, okay, but what he's saying is, even if that's the case, when you get judged on Judgment Day, you're by yourself. And we know it's Judgment Day because of at the hour is that moment of judgment, when we get back to the collective, are trembling with tenderness. So we're again, to me, like, a little bit like the deliberate disguises. We're trying to be tender and trying to sort of say we're something we're not, but we're trembling because we know it's not accurate. Okay, so the alliteration sort of brings up that image to me of the idea that we'd like to be perceived a certain way, but the trembling will reveal us. Okay, and there's almost a paradoxical sense to that as well. Then the last two lines of this stanza, lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone. So again, we've got the broken stone, that pagan sort of, praying to a vapid god or to something that doesn't, sort of have meaning. And we've got the inverse of this quote from Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet says to Romeo, lips that they must use in prayer. But here we're using our lips that would kiss, and then they form prayers but they form prayers to nothingness, okay, to a broken stone, to those false idols. And as Kristen mentioned in class, the scarecrow would not have partners or idols. That broken stone might be all the scarecrow has to sort of worship. All right, so they might be a little bit sort of desperate for something out in the field. Okay, in that sort of totally fake and contrived world. So essentially, we get this idea that this is futile. Praying to a broken stone is a futile, pointless exercise. Okay, which is what everything appears to be for the hollow men at this stage. Then we move on to part 4, and again we've got the eyes and the synecdoche. These eyes are a running motif now, and like we said, window to the soul. They tell a lot of truths. But here, they're not here. The eyes are not present, and there are no eyes here. So no, very high modality, unequivocal. There's no chance, okay, of the hollow men being able to transfer into the realm of heaven. But in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms. So the dying stars, let's just look at that one first. We had the fading star first, then we had the twinkle of that fading star. Now we've got the dying star. So unequivocally, it's getting worse and worse. So again, we've got that idea of decay or descent, throughout the poem. Also here, we've got the idea of the hollow valley being sort of paralleled and mirrored to the people themselves. So it's like the people are a representation of their setting, which I believe Eliot is trying to sort of say to us, that modern man has decayed because of modern society. It's like modern society's fault. There's no chance for modern man to survive in that world, based on the world that they're actually, sort of existing in. The broken jaw is, it's very difficult to eat or drink. You can't speak out, you can't cry, you can't, sort of voice what is happening. And then the lost kingdom is that kingdom of God that we referred to before with the kingdom. And they've lost it because they never embraced it on earth. So they can't really, it's lost to them because they can't really go back now and say that they would like to, be very religious and be very faith-filled. Okay, they missed that opportunity while they were, on earth. When we go to the valley, we've got this psalm that's going to become pretty important, where it says in Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So for the hollow men, if they were in that really dark area in the shadow of death, they would fear no evil if God was with them. But we already know in that lost kingdom that God is not with them because they did not show faith during their life. So when you then read it again, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's all they've got, because they are going to have fear of evil because they've got no one with them. They're alone. Or whether they're alone collectively with the other people who are alone as well. So even in the collective, it's not a positive because they're isolated, from true meaning and true purpose, because all of them have had the same experience. Okay, and that's why they're sort of mentioned, generally speaking, in the collective. That shadow is going to come back in the next page. Okay, so we're going to look at that more deeply there. Then in this last of meeting places, okay, so we're really right before that sort of close to that moment of judgment, they grope together. So first we had leaning, so a little bit like the descension of dying star that we just looked at. Now we've got the together. First they were leaning, then they were whispering, now they're groping. So it's more aggressive, it's more desperate, but the hollow men are together because their experience is collective. Excuse the bell. Okay, so then we've got this idea of the collective immorality is based on the social decay of the entire world, not just the individual. Okay, it's happened to everybody. And at this point, okay, where they grope together, they avoid speech because what could they say at this point that might be able to save them? They've lived this corrupt life, and there's nothing positive that's going to come out of it for them. So they're better off keeping, speech to a minimum. Here at the moment, they're gathered on this beach of the tumid river, which is a really, sort of contrasting image to all this dryness that we've experienced so far in the poem. Now all of a sudden there's this, swollen river, full of water, but unfortunately it's not that positive an image because they can't cross. Okay, so they're gathered there waiting together for Sharon to either pay a coin, but then they don't have anyone to ask a coin for, like the kids do on Guy Fawkes Day or Guy Fawkes Night, and maybe Sharon isn't there at all, but whatever it is, they're trapped waiting to try and cross the river Styx, but they can't get across. Okay, so again we've got them almost trapped in this in this purgatory where they just can't get forward in their life. All right, and then the next stanza starts with sightless. So they not only can they are avoiding speech, they can't see unless the eyes reappear. So unless gives them the perspective that if something could change, they would be able to get better and they would be able to sort of produce a better situation. So once the eyes reappear, the perpetual star and the multifolate rose are very beautiful and very positive images. Okay, so if the eyes were able to reappear, they might be able to get into heaven, but because they don't have it, they can't. So the perpetual star would be potentially the Star of Bethlehem, which guided the three wise men, and as I said, we'll link that into the journey to the Magi when we do the next poem. But that idea that the perpetual nature of it is it'd be never ending, it'd be some hope, it'd be forever. And the multifolate rose goes back to Dante's Paradiso, where the final vision of a flower made up of saints and angels would rescue them, and potentially even it represents Mary, the mother of Jesus. So such a great image, would be so good. Of death's twilight kingdom, they'd be back into this kingdom of God. They'd be able to sort of have the hope, but then it's only of empty men, and the reality is that hope for empty men can't work, because how could they have a chance of salvation if they're empty? So it'd be an enormous miracle for this to occur, to restore their opportunity to be able to go to heaven. But reality would say, because they're empty, once they spoke or once anyone looked into their eyes, they would see the truth, and the truth would be that they are hollow and not worthy, of entering the kingdom of God. Then we go into the fifth section, and we start with the sort of children's song that they sort of dance to, and usually it would be here we go round the mulberry bush, but here in the poem we've got again a slight sort of shift. Here we go round the prickly pear, and we do this at 5 o'clock in the morning. So the prickly pear obviously is a negative image. Comes from the cactus. It's again dry and it's arid. It feels dangerous if you were dancing around it. You could get pricked with the thorn. So it's not like a positive thing. And we're doing this at 5 o'clock in the morning when Christ's resurrection, sort of as a trope, sort of occurred. When we think about this, though, that 5 o'clock sort of signifies that to the Christian faith. These guys are doing that at the same time that they're going around a prickly pear, and that sort of idea of them going around in never-ending circles means that they wouldn't be able to sort of escape to sort of really understand what was happening at 5 o'clock in Christ's resurrection and the significance of that. They've missed it, which essentially would be true of the modern man in this modern sort of decaying society. Then we'll go through with these three next stanzas with fairly similar sort of structures. So we've got between the idea and the reality, the motion, the act, falls the shadow, and then we've got conception, creation, emotion, and response, still the shadows in between, desire, spasm, potency, existence, essence, descent, and still the shadow exists. So the shadow lies between these things because they can't get from one to the other. So we get back to that, the shadow of death from Psalm 23, which again, if we didn't have God with us, would be very scary. And when we look at this, the idea is the start, but the shadow exists before it gets to reality. So the idea never comes to reality. We've got motion, but the shadow exists so that that never gets to action. So motion's cool, but what if you can't act on that? The same thing here with conception. So we can be born, but we will never be created. We've got emotion, but we'll never be able to respond to that emotion. We have desire, sexual interest, but we would never get to the ecstasy of that sexual interest. We've got potency, but we would never really live and never really exist. And then the worst one is the essence, the concept of living, of being alive. All we have is descent, okay? And that sort of reality of humanity's, sort of descent because of the decay of modern man. When we look at the lines in between the stanzas that are sort of epigraphs or sort of excerpts from a version of the Lord's Prayer, we've got "For thine is the kingdom," and what should come after that essentially is a reference to basically acid is in heaven as it is on earth sort of thing. If you'd done the right thing on earth, you would be able to appreciate and exist in the world of heaven. You'd be rewarded. And the fragmentation and the incomplete nature of this shows that the hollow men don't have that perception or understanding because they didn't engage with that religious element of their lives when they had the opportunity. When we look at the second one, life is very long. The irony in this is that the afterlife is eternal, so it'll be way longer, but it shows how tired and fatigued the modern man has been because of their existence and because of what they went through on earth. So again, a fairly negative, sort of connotation. And then it goes back to "For thine is the kingdom." Okay, so again, it's almost like they're trying to remember, this prayer and trying to engage with what might allow them to access heaven, but because of the nature of the world that they have lived in, that's an impossibility. Then Eliot sort of has these fragmented parts of the previous lines. So, for thine is the kingdom, and life is very long, and he just has the start of them. So, for thine is. Life is, for thine is the. Okay, so it gets a little bit better at the end, but it's still not enough. Okay, so it doesn't matter what the hollow men do, there's no hope for them to be able to enjoy the afterlife because of their existence in this sort of decaying world. All right, and then the last stanza, which is essentially the most famous aspect of the poem, goes back to the children's song. This is the way the world ends. It's got that musical element, and obviously it's sort of quite poignantly sort of saying the world will end. The world is over, and when the world ends, it won't be with a bang. A bit like opposite to the way that the world potentially started with the Big Bang. It'll be with a whimper. It'll be anticlimactic. It'll be slow. There'll be a decay and a descent. The world is ending not just for the hollow men, essentially it's ending for everybody.